Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining this showcase today. It's very exciting for the DSA to organize this session, and we would like to thank Forum Global for organizing the event and inviting us to the Americas Spectrum Conference. So before we start, let me give a few words about the DSA. Next slide, please. So my name is Marta Suarez. I am the president of the Dynamic Spectrum Alliance. And for those of you that are not familiar with the DSA, we are a global cross-industry non-for-profit organization. And we advocate for laws, regulations, and best practices that will lead to more efficient use of the spectrum. And we think that that is very important because that is a way to foster innovation, but also to increase affordable connectivity for all. So in next slide, please. So today we are going to have a review about the different updates in terms of the 6 gigahertz band. So the recent decisions, some important aspects about the license exempt technologies that can operate in the 6 gigahertz band. And let me start by quickly referring to the 3 use cases that we could have in this band. So we could have very low power devices. They are intended for applications like augmented and virtual reality. They could be used indoors or outdoors. And as their name indicates, they have very low power levels. So they are mainly for short range applications. And then the second type of use case is low power indoor. And that is very important for connectivity at home, for households, for enterprises. And that's basically, I would say, the most common use of Wi-Fi networks currently. It's when we are having many devices accessing internet through a Wi-Fi connection. And so with these new Wi-Fi 6E technologies that we are going to hear about during this session, you could have a very a great performance, and we could talk about gigabit speeds. And then the third use case is standard powered. This could be used outdoors and for outdoor and indoor applications. And this is very important for connectivity. It could be at public hotspots, for example, when you have in many places and countries Wi-Fi access in public spaces like parks or university campus, or even it's also important for wireless internet service providers, WISPs, that could use this type of links to provide broadband access in hard-to-reach areas or underserved areas. So the 3 use cases are important, and we think from DSA perspective that all of them have a great performance to offer to final users, and they should be considered. However, they don't need to be adopted at the same time. There are different rules that could apply for all of them, and regulators have the flexibility to decide on each one of these use cases. In the case of standard power applications, we have automated frequency coordination, and we are going to hear much more about that and the recent updates on AFCs during this session. So without any further details, let's give the floor to our speakers today. So there will be Mary Brown from Cisco, who will be opening and giving an overview about the situation in the 6 gigahertz band. Then we are going to hear from David Wright from HPE Aruba, and he's going to talk about the ecosystem of the equipments and the trade-offs and why we need the entire band, the entire 6 gigahertz band. And finally, we are going to close the session with Mark Gibson from CommScope, who is going to give us some updates about the AFC certification process. So thank you again for joining, and I hope you will enjoy and have a good time during this session. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you for having me at the Americas Spectrum Management Conference. I'm Mary Brown from Cisco. And I'd like to give you a little bit of perspective from Cisco about the 6 gigahertz band initiative and why Cisco thinks this is such a wonderful development globally, why we're enthusiastic about it, and why we think you should be enthusiastic about it too. We are a global supplier of internet solutions and products to enterprises and governments just about everywhere in the world. And that gives us a unique window into how networks are changing and how customers are using networks differently and how they will be using them differently in the future. In fact, our job as a technology provider is to look ahead, listen to our customers, but also look ahead and see how we have to evolve technology to meet future needs. So in that spirit, I would like to discuss a little bit about what's going on in the 6 gigahertz band as we sit here sort of the second half of 2021. Next slide, please. One of the features about license exempt in the 6 gigahertz band is that it grows from an ecosystem particularly in the Wi-Fi space that is already enormous in terms of the number of devices in use, chipsets, access points, the economic value that this ecosystem brings. This has been a tremendous success, growing from the 2.4 gigahertz band and portions of the 5 gigahertz band. It is such a success that in some ways we are a victim of our own success. It has become very popular, and in many places and for many purposes, the band is becoming more crowded. So as we look ahead and try to figure out what is changing about Wi-Fi or what is changing about license exempt technologies, some of the things that we see from our customers are a desire for more deterministic networks that are less subject to congestion that might occur in the 5 gigahertz or 2.4 gigahertz band. We see a requirement for low latency, particularly in industrial uses for robotics, but also increasingly in places like hospitals and even educational institutions where robotics are increasingly going to be used in the future. They may not be as prevalent today, but that transition is coming for sure. Augmented reality, virtual reality, or as they like to call it, X-reality, anything reality. Those are not just consumer devices or gaming. These are things that are going to be used inside of enterprises for training and education and for getting jobs done, right? So this is becoming an enormously important category for enterprises going forward. And of course, we have, machine to machine, the explosion in connectivity as more devices become connected so that enterprises can understand where devices are, if they're operable, what's working, what's not. And some of these deployments are extremely dense. And then, of course, since we began the journey toward finding more spectrum for license exempt and for Wi-Fi, we've had the global pandemic, which by some measures exploded the demand for Wi-Fi as we retreated into our homes to be able to work and go to school and entertain ourselves while in various states of lockdown all over the world. And last but not least, I would say, and this is not so much a Cisco sweet spot, but a trend that I see as very important is the trend toward connectivity in just about every form of consumer electronics that you can imagine. Not just major appliances in the home becoming connected to Wi-Fi, but all manner of gym equipment or various kinds of home equipment. And it's not so much for the consumer necessarily that these things are being connected, but more for the purpose of being able to download software patches and new versions of software to run these appliances going forward. So manufacturers are using that connectivity to essentially engage in maintenance, and in some cases repair of appliances and keep things going forward. That trend is well underway and there doesn't seem to be anything stopping it. So that's also a major shift as we look forward. So if we could move to the next slide, please. So people may have seen this depiction before, and I have pulled out Latin American traffic for the purposes of today's talk. But clearly, fixed Wi-Fi, Wi-Fi from fixed access points in the dark blue is a tremendously important category, rivaling that of our use of cell phones and mobile data, but also Wi-Fi from mobile devices. So as we call it, offload. These are devices which are equipped with both Wi-Fi and mobile connectivity. But when they're in a home or work environment, they're operating off Wi-Fi. So if you add the bright green and the dark blue together, you get a jaw-dropping amount of traffic that not only is the majority of IP traffic originating and terminating in the region, but itself is also growing tremendously over time and is projected to continue to grow over time, even as we move into our 5G future. So this is all really an artifact of the kinds of demand changes that I was talking about on the previous slide. So next slide, please. So one of the issues as we and other manufacturers have looked out at this horizon, if you will, is the fact that the Wi-Fi industry or the license-exempt wireless LAN industry has not received new spectrum since shortly after the World Radio Conference of 2003. And that, as I like to remind people, was 4 years before Apple introduced its first iPhone. So it was back in the dark ages when we last got a tranche of spectrum. And that was wonderful spectrum back when we were in our 4th generation of Wi-Fi, back in Wi-Fi 4. And we were running 20 and 40 megahertz wide channels. That was terrific. But several generations of Wi-Fi later, and looking at the future demand cases, it was very apparent that as much as we would love to continue to innovate on 5 gigahertz spectrum, that was not going to accommodate just the aggregate demand numbers, but also the changing use cases that we saw. So the industry went off and looked at what could we possibly use instead of 5, or in addition to 5 would be a better way of saying it. And we took a hard look at the 6 gigahertz band, which of course is in many countries populated by fixed microwave links, as well as C-band satellite uplink. And there are a few other incumbents depending on the country as well. And it looked to us as if there would be a case for moving license-exempt technology into those bands if you could mitigate to protect those incumbents. If there was a way to do that, it looked as if an unlicensed or license-exempt underlay in that spectrum range could provide the capacity we needed while allowing not just the incumbents to remain, but the incumbents to continue to grow their networks. So we came up with a series of mitigations that we proposed. This is a chart from the US FCC. Other countries are picking and choosing what they think is best for them. But this is the chart from the FCC showing the categories that Martha discussed in her introduction. Standard power, which could be used indoor and outdoor at 36 dBm for large indoor environments, and also for outdoor use. So a lot of enterprises may have an outdoor use on their premises. And that's important. We do have to be able to avoid microwave links. And for that reason, we proposed, and the FCC accepted, an idea to use a database mechanism known as automated frequency coordination to ensure that any outdoor and indoor uses of standard power would stay away from microwave links. So Mark Gibson is going to talk about where we are in the development of that. Low power indoor, kind of the workhorse of license exempt for your carpeted offices and schools and whatnot, you put these access points in the ceiling and provide terrific internet connectivity at multiple times the speeds of today's Wi-Fi. So that's something known and familiar to everybody. And then we're also looking at very low power, also an interest of industry, not so much Cisco, but of the industry group. This would be portable devices operating at very low power, essentially in and around you to connect devices that you're wearing or carrying and things like that. So with those mitigations, we believe, and many regulators have agreed, that coexistence is possible in the band with the incumbents, and should enable them to continue to grow and thrive, and should give us the access to the spectrum that we need. So next slide, please. So here we are in the second half of 2021, and I wanted to call out for a moment some work that is available to you on the DSA website. 6 gigahertz license exempt, why the full 1200 megahertz and why now? And it's a white paper that describes what the technology case is, why additional spectrum is needed to support the next generation of technology, namely Wi-Fi 6 or 6E as it's known in the 6 gigahertz band. What was driving the decision to develop that new technology, how we propose to coexist, and sort of what the state of the band is. And it's a nice all-purpose white paper that lays out the case and provides you with some status updates on where things are in terms of government decision making in all of the regions, and we have regulatory activity moving globally at this point. So I would commend that white paper to you, which provides a lot of detail. So in the 18 months, I think, since the FCC has made its decision, it was the first decision to open the full 1200 megahertz from 5925 all the way up to 7125 megahertz to license exempt, using the mitigations I talked about. I just wanted to make a couple of observations as I have watched other regulators grapple with what to do with the 6 gigahertz band. And I speak to you from a perspective of also being a former regulator at the FCC and understanding sort of the institutional decision-making processes that go on inside of regulatory agencies. And my observation is this: it is often very difficult for regulators to look ahead and to peer into the future. They're very good at understanding the here and now, or where we've just been, because they can gather data, and that data feels very real to them. It feels comfortable to them. But when it comes to looking into the future, which is what companies like mine have to do every day, they're less adept at it. They're less agile. They feel like they're on a less firm ground, if you will, in trying to figure out what's coming and how to rationalize their choices. And it can be difficult, I think, to separate hype from reality, and how do you know that you're moving in the correct direction and one that's going to pay off. And I want to suggest a couple of things that I think help you as you make decisions on license exempt spectrum, or any kind of spectrum for that matter, or any kind of regulatory proceeding for that matter. One is to look at whether the whole ecosystem is moving in a similar direction. Do you have one company coming to you asking for something, or is an entire ecosystem moving and asking for sort of the same result? Are they united in their goal of what they want to do? Because moving an ecosystem the size of the Wi-Fi industry to work in unison together for a goal is an enormous accomplishment in and of itself. And it needs to be recognized that when companies across the globe are speaking with one voice, that's an important moment, and that should not go unnoticed. The other thing to do is to look at standards and what's happening in the standard space. The Wi-Fi industry several years ago worked on IEEE standards to update those to Wi-Fi 6. Work has been underway for some years now in ETSI to get to a stable draft in Europe on the 6 gigahertz space. And that work is costly. Companies have to send people to those meetings. You have to contribute your ideas and your writing and your editing. And that is also an indication of things moving in a particular direction. And this was one where the Wi-Fi industry got out pretty early on the 6 gigahertz band, and the work is largely done at this point. Not only are the standards done, but interoperability testing is done. And so the industry is poised to implement the band now in a way that that should give comfort to anybody who's looking at a regulatory decision. Another way that you can consider what to do is look at what's going on with other regulators. And here in the 6 gigahertz band, we are blessed with a number of wonderful decisions that regulators have made favoring license exempt, many regulators favoring it for the entire band. So US, not just US, but Canada, Brazil, many of the countries in Region 2, Saudi Arabia, and a number of countries have considered 500 megahertz in the lower part, but have not ruled out what to do about the upper part at this point. So we have a lot of regulators who are concluding that yes, more spectrum is needed for license exempt, and a lot of them concluding yes, in fact, we need the full 1200 for license exempt. So if we can move to the next slide, please. The result of all of that. This is just a quick departure. One of the other ways to tell if you need to move ahead is what are your economists saying? Your economists do have some ability to look into a crystal ball and see what's happening in terms of technology's impact to economies. And we have established, I think, very well that the global value of Wi-Fi to the world's economy this year is in excess of $3 trillion, which is an astonishing number. But it is reflective of how much Wi-Fi is embedded into enterprises, how it is used to deliver entertainment, and a multitude of uses in government and other places. Okay, next slide, please. So this is the result that I was talking about with where the band stands today, where the green countries, of course, have already made a decision to open at least part of the band, if not all of the band, to license exempt. And the blue countries are ones where consultations are pending. And this is a mere 18 months from when the FCC made their first decision, right? So that is powerful momentum. I have never seen any license exempt band move this quickly. It certainly did not happen in the wake of the World Radio Conference in 2003. So it's very exciting to see. I would say of the global domestic product for the world, these countries now represent close to 60% of the global GDP. And for the countries that have opened the full band, they represent about 42% of GDP. So anyone who's considering this band, you're in good company. Considering it for license exempt, you're in good company. You have a lot of folks who are with you on that topic. So I think I would like to conclude there. I would like to thank the America's Spectrum Management Conference for having me. And I will hopefully talk to you soon. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Dave Wright, and I'm the head of Global Wireless Policy with Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all today. I'm going to talk a little bit about why the 6 gigahertz band is so important for next generation Wi-Fi and other unlicensed technologies, and then a little bit more about the ecosystem that's formed around this opportunity. So why is 6 gigahertz so important for Wi-Fi and other unlicensed technologies? Well, if you look at the slide here, we talk about some of the typical data rates that you can achieve today in the 5 gigahertz band, which would typically use either 20 or at the widest, really 40 megahertz channels. It's really not practical to go any wider channel bandwidths in 5 gigahertz just because of the limited number of channels that we do have available today. So typically you're going to see 20 or possibly 40 megahertz channels in the enterprise types environments. And with a two-stream client, which is really the norm on the client device side, particularly in the mobile form factor, that maxes out at about 574 megabits per second, which is an impressive data rate, but it's certainly not the gigabit wireless future that we're all talking about for the next 10 years, really to take us through the 2030 timeframe. So what you're seeing on the right side is that with Wi-Fi 6E operating in the 6 gigahertz band and the much wider bandwidth that we have to work with, it now becomes practical to actually deploy even in an enterprise setting or a multi-tenant dwelling unit setting where you've got multiple apartment units in a single building. It becomes practical all of a sudden to actually use 80 megahertz channel widths or potentially even 160 in some settings. And with that, the same two-stream capability on the client side yields data rates of 1.2 gigabits per second with an 80 megahertz channel or up to 2.4 gigabits in a 160 megahertz channel. And this is really very much a parallel to what's going on with the 3GPP technologies. So as we move into the 5G era, quote unquote, what you'll see is there's been a huge push, and I know that all of our regulatory audience is very well familiar with this, but there's been a huge push to make either 100 megahertz or at a minimum 80 megahertz of spectrum, mid-band spectrum, available for each operator. And the reason for this, the reason that we're going from 10 or 20 megahertz channel widths in LTE to 80 or 100 megahertz channel widths in 5G is the exact same reason. One of the easiest ways to achieve greater throughputs is obviously by addressing wider channels, and Wi-Fi needs that same capability, and that's really one of the big things that Wi-Fi 6E is all about. So some of the specific applications that we're excited about, what's going to happen with AR, VR, MR type applications. When we talk about Wi-Fi 6E's role in the 6 gigahertz unlicensed role in 5G, one of the things that we like to talk about is just the use of it for offload, right? So Wi-Fi technology carries approximately 70% of the data traffic from mobile devices around the world, and it's sort of averaged globally. That's expected to continue, particularly for in-building use cases where Wi-Fi is the most dominant wireless technology, will continue to do so or be so. And so in order for the data traffic from all of those mobile devices to continue to be carried over Wi-Fi when a user is in building, when they're at their home, when they're at the office, as two leading use cases, as well as a variety of public venues, we really need for the user data experience on Wi-Fi to be comparable to what they experience when they're on the cellular networks outdoors or in a mobile situation. So again, these are some of the reasons that we believe that 6 gigahertz is so important and why we're so pleased that there's such strong movement around the world to open it for unlicensed uses. When we talk about the ecosystem that is forming around the opportunity, and HPE's perspective is that ecosystem is hugely important. When a regulator and policymakers go to the trouble to open a band, they expect to see industry respond and bring solutions to the market. And that's exactly what we've seen with the 6 gigahertz unlicensed band. With the activity, I would say the regulatory and advocacy activity starting on this in early 2016, by 2017, late 2017 timeframe, industry had actually begun working on, product development, as well as industry standardization. And the end result of that is what you're seeing on the screen. So, we've got a range of different form factors and use cases represented by the unlicensed and Wi-Fi ecosystem that is already available for the 6 gigahertz band. So, Broadcom and Qualcomm chipsets, Intel modules like the AX200, which goes in a variety of form factors for laptops and tablet devices. You've got mobile devices from Samsung. You have laptops and notebook form factors from various manufacturers. Consumer grade access points. So I think we've got Netgear, and Asus represented here on the screen, but there's a variety of other OEMs who've come out now with some consumer-oriented residential access points. IoT, so smart speakers and things like this coming to market. And then finally, on the far right, we're showing the Aruba 635, which is the first announced enterprise class Wi-Fi 6E access point. HPE was very proud to announce that back in May, and we're shipping it this quarter. So again, the full range really of Wi-Fi use cases are now available for the 6 gigahertz band. You see at the top, the Wi-Fi Alliance estimated or forecast that more than 338 million Wi-Fi 6E or Wi-Fi 6 and 6 gigahertz devices are expected to come to market this year, so 2021. And that by next year, so in 2022, that number increases to it's about 700 million. So 20% of all of the Wi-Fi 6 device shipments will support Wi-Fi 6E. And again, that's about 700 million. So more than doubling. And we have another quote from Broadcom here. They had already shipped 700 million Wi-Fi 6 devices, and now they're excited about what the 6 gigahertz band is going to do in addition to the regular Wi-Fi 6 capabilities. I would then contrast that with what has happened from an ecosystem formation point of view with licensed or IMT type services in the 6 gigahertz band. Recently, there's been some calls to contemplate or calls on regulators to contemplate licensing either some or all of the 6 gigahertz band. And again, ecosystem is incredibly important. It really does nobody any good for regulators or policymakers to make spectrum available, and there not be any equipment to take advantage of that, of course. So what we're showing here, and I apologize, I see my slide got slightly truncated. But what we're showing here on the left is sort of the Wi-Fi and unlicensed. So it includes 5G, new radio unlicensed on the left. And then on the right, we're contrasting that with what's going on with the licensed, regular IMT type services in the 6 gigahertz band. And what we're showing is, on the standards front, we've got, IEEE standardized 802.11ax for the 6 gigahertz band. That was back in February of this year. The spec was finalized. 3GPP with 5G new radio unlicensed, so NR operating in the unlicensed band. They have that in release 16 for the 5 gigahertz band, and then the 6 gigahertz support for NRU is expected in release 18. Moving down to the equipment authorizations, the FCC published what's known as a KDB, or essentially their procedures for how they were going to authorize equipment for the 6 gigahertz band, the low power indoor mode of operation. That was published back in February. Again, the ECC in Europe published their decision in December 2020. And then, so the FCC began authorizing equipment. I think the first modules and chips were probably authorized. It was either February or March, probably March of this year. But in July, we had the first Broadcom chip authorized in Europe as well. So we now have equipment authorizations going on in the US, in Europe, and the other markets that have moved on 6 gigahertz are in various stages of implementing their equipment authorizations, but it's well underway. From an industry certification perspective, the Wi-Fi Alliance announced the Wi-Fi 6E program, which again is Wi-Fi 6 in the 6 gigahertz band. They announced that program in January of 2020, and then they launched it in January of 21. So that program actually goes back now, goodness, over a year and a half. 3GPP for NRU, RAN 4. They have the NRU RAN 4 equipment specs ready for 5 gigahertz. That was in release 16. And then again, 6 gigahertz will be addressed in release 18. So I mentioned there's the Wi-Fi Alliance forecast down at the bottom. And then again, what I'm going to do is contrast that with the licensed IMT type activity. So the only thing you're going to see in that right column is that, yes, there have been some feasibility work items approved in 3GPP, and that's it. Yeah, there hasn't been any equipment regulatory authorizations, there hasn't been any RAN 4 activity, and there are no equipment forecasts. So, you know, I think that kind of speaks for itself. So the message really is that there is Wi-Fi equipment available today. There's no IMT equipment available for 6 gigahertz. And then on the far right, what we're really pointing out is that the N78 and N77 bands for IMT, so call it the the 3 well, I'm going to say 3.3 to 4.2. I think it may go to 3100. But in any event, that 3 gigahertz band has really been the focus, for the cellular industry for almost a decade now. They've been pushing very hard for that 80 to 100 megahertz per operator to be made available in 3 gigahertz. And, and policymakers and regulators have heard that. They've gone to great lengths to make the spectrum available. And the chart on the right just reflects that that is where the focus is, for 5G licensed development, both on the infrastructure and the client side. Makes all the sense in the world. That's where the focus should continue to be, while the focus for 6 gigahertz should be on realizing the unlicensed mid-band opportunity and opening it for that ecosystem that I talked about. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Hello, my name is Mark Gibson, and I am the Director of Business Development and Spectrum Policy for CommScope. What I thought I would do today is give a quick update. Oh, and I'd also like to thank both DSA and Facebook for the opportunity to speak today, and also for Forum Global for just the America's Spectrum Management Conference. It's one of the best conferences on spectrum management, I think, that's out there. So it's an honor to be here today. So I have put together a deck to talk a little bit about what's going on in the United States with respect to the testing and certification of the automated frequency coordination system. This is the system that is necessary to deploy the standard power access points in the U.S. And the model is being replicated in other parts of the world where there is a shared situation with incumbents, primarily point-to-point microwave systems. And so recently, the FCC issued a public notice inviting proposals from AFC providers, or want-to-be AFC providers. So I thought I'd spend a little bit of time just going through how the commission plans to do the certification. So we go to the next slide. So basically, we are using the FCC's report and order, wherein they describe briefly how the AFCs will be tested and certified. And there's a lot of open items here. I also mentioned I am the chair of the 6 gigahertz committee in the WIN forum. So we're getting ready to meet with the commission to talk more detail about how this is going to happen. But at a high level, the commission has said in the report and order that they'll designate AFC operators using this thing called a multi-stage process, similar to what they did for TV Whitespace and CBRS SAS. And many of us have been through that and understand that. They were very different for those two. So it's really hard to figure out what's going to happen with AFC, but at least we have some background on that. It says the first step, they'll issue a public notice. Again, that happened a few weeks ago, and they approved that last week. So the public notice is out there and it's official. And I have some timing on here in a moment, so I'll talk about that. And in the process, there will be an opportunity for the public to comment on the proposals that would be submitted for AFCs. And I'll talk about that in just a second. So once the AFC operators who submit their proposals are reviewed by the commission, then the Office of Engineering and Technology, which is the OET, will approve these applicants that demonstrate their systems can comply with AFC requirements. And our experience has been in TV whitespace and CBRS that pretty much anybody that is viable and at least complies with the SEC's requirements in the public notice should be approved, at least for conditional operation, or conditionally. There's some steps that happen after that. I'll talk about it in a minute. So after the conditional approval, the systems would be required to be tested and then subject to a public trial. And this public trial process was similar to what happened in TV whitespace, where TV whitespace administrators and then subsequently here AFC operators will need to make their systems available to the interested parties. And that's a big question: is who are interested parties, so they can check to make sure that the AFC provides accurate results. And so that process about checking and make sure the AFC provides accurate results is being discussed both in the Wi-Fi Alliance and the Wireless Innovation Forum through test vectors and test plans and that sort of thing. And then and could be concurrent with the public trial, there will be testing in the lab. The lab testing will precede the public trial, but then there will be a demonstration project or field testing. And for those out there that were familiar with what we did in the CBRS world with the SAS, it would be similar, we think, to what was the initial commercial deployment step. And then the commission will not grant any approval to any AFC unless they can prove that deployment of standard power devices will not cause interference to anything that's operating out there right now. So that's how they laid it out in the report and order. The next slide, please, then describes a little bit more detail from the public notice. So proposals are due on the public notice from AFC operators no later than November 30th this year, so in about 2 months. Again, the commission reiterates that the public will have opportunity to comment, and the comments that on the proposals, and the comments must be submitted no later than December 21st this year. And the commission also says that anything submitted, any proposal submitted by November 30th, they'll be treated concurrently with equal priority. What they do say, and I didn't get into any detail here, but what happens if a proposal is submitted after the 30th, depending upon how long after the 30th it's submitted, the commission reserves the right to sort of hold them back and put them on a different path, so to speak, or at least a different time frame. And again, we saw this with TV whitespace and with CBRS. In CBRS, there were 2 waves. There was a wave 1 and a wave 2. And in the first wave, I believe there were 8, I'm sorry. And in the second, well, actually, were 6, and in the second wave there were 4 with a total of 10. And so it could be that everybody shows up on November 30th, or a few show up on November 30th and the few show up at some point after that. The point is that the commission wants to be clear is that none of these is mutually exclusive. In other words, the grant of one would not preclude the grant of another. So they're going to be treating all of the proposals that get submitted with equal priority. And as they will probably at least conditionally approve anybody that, as I said before, is viable and has a proposal that at least meets the commission's requirements. And again, as it was showed in the order, this is, like I said, is verbiage from the public notice. The proposals then will be conditionally approved, and then the systems get submitted for testing. And then there's this whole public checking process that goes on. And it says at the bottom that the OET will provide additional details on the testing process later. And from the WinForms perspective, we're hoping to meet with the commission soon to begin to dig more into what will be part of the testing process. So next slide, please. In this slide, we sort of just boiled down the summary of what has to happen. So first thing is AFC, actually the first thing is AFC, prospective AFC operators submit their proposals to the commission by November 30th. And then the systems must be tested and certified for commercial operation. The testing and certification are 2 separate processes. Most likely what will happen is, and again, what we're trying to propose in the Wireless Innovation Forum is that the commission use some sort of third-party labs. Kind of like what we did with CBRS. The third-party lab was only a single third-party lab, which was the Institute for Telecommunication Sciences, which is part of NTIA. We're not sure that that's an option that's viable right now, because we're not sure that ITS really is available to do this or wants to, but to the extent they do, maybe the commission will consider them. Nonetheless, we're hoping as a industry that the commission does go to a third-party testing approach. And so what will happen at the end of the third-party testing, most likely the AFC operators will get reports that they'll then submit to the commission that will be used to determine at least the extent to which an AFC operator passed testing. And so going down there to the fourth bullet, one of the things that we've realized from the two previous processes, which again is TV whitespace and CBRS, is the processes could be lengthy. For TV whitespace, the time frame from when the public notice was issued asking for TV whitespace database administrator proposals to when the commission issued the public notice saying that TV whitespace databases had been approved for full commercial operation, it took 3 years. For CBRS, for the same time frame, it took 4 years. Now, there was a lot that went on in that ensuing time. There was a government shutdown in the CBRS timeframe. In this TV whitespace timeframe, there was a lot of additional rulemaking that happened. And in fact, in the middle of that, the commission changed the rules a little bit by going down the road with the Middle Class Tax Act, which sort of changed the TV whitespace rules actually substantially. We're hoping that none of that happens here for 6 gigahertz AFC. So we hope not to incur any regulatory delays. And so we think the process could be shortened a lot using parallel efforts and getting away from some of the lengthy regulatory things. Nonetheless, we're still meeting with the commission to ask them, how can we streamline the process across the board from start to finish, including what steps can be done in parallel, and we're still working on that. So if you go to the next slide, we really just identify the 4 steps. There's the initial public notice, which has been issued. Then there's the conditional approval of the operators, which is what happens after the commission reviews the proposals for AFCs and the public comment. Then there's the testing period, the public trial and demonstration projects. We sort of look at them all together. The testing probably will occur before the public trial and demonstration. Nonetheless, we're kind of talking about them as one step. Although again, like testing may predate or precede the trial and demonstration projects. And then at the end of that, the commission will issue a public notice certifying some number, if not all, of the AFCs that provided proposals for a nationwide operation. So we go to the next slide. I just laid this out in terms of sort of a linear process. You'll see kind of what it looks like linearly. So to the far left, the commission issued the public notice. That's happened. Again, those public notices, if you see the second milestone there, proposals will be due on November 30th. And then the third milestone is the commission or the comment period ends on December 21st. And so there's the time frame within which it takes the commission to review the AFC proposals. In the past, that's been fairly lengthy. We're hopeful that the commission can do that in some period of time that's sufficiently short so that we can get an order conditionally approving AFCs sometime early next year, maybe in the first quarter or maybe early in the second quarter. There should be no regulatory issues there. Then we get into the test and trial period where there'll be testing, public trial and demonstration projects. And again, we think that that could be lumped into one where we can do the testing up front and then go into the public trial, the demonstration projects, and then we should be done. And then finally, we get into we get our reports, we submit them to the commission. The commission reviews that. Again, we hope that review process could be fairly short. And then the commission issues a public notice allowing for nationwide operation. So we've put together some time frames and thinking about that. I don't want to put time frames out there right now. So, but basically, we're looking at, sometime late next year, maybe in a year, where we should be, AFC should be open for commercial operation. Best case, and, maybe on into 2023, but we'll see. So I believe that's it. If you could go to the next slide. I think that's all I have for today. Yes. So that's really a quick thumbnail of what the test and certification process looks like based on everything. So we're driving it both from our company's perspective and in the WIN Forum and also the Wi-Fi Alliance. And so we're certainly hopeful that we can make it happen sooner than later. So thanks for your attention. And if there's any questions, feel free to connect through Forum Global. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mark, for that overview. And thank you, Mary and Dave, too. So now it's the end of the session, and I would like to close with some final remarks. So some final messages and recommendations for those that attended this session from the DSA. So we think that definitely license-exempt access to the 6 gigahertz band is very important. It is a way to attend the growing demand for wireless capacity. It's also the decision for the entire band. It's creating a long-term vision because it's creating the right conditions for Wi-Fi 7 and future spectrum requirements where we will need channels of up to 320 megahertz band of bandwidth. It is also meeting the increased demand for internet access, considering the COVID-19 situation. There are incredible economic benefits, even if there are no licensing fees. Mary had referred to the importance of Wi-Fi industry for the economies of the regions and the countries, and there are many studies that show that those impacts. There is a global momentum to make the entire 6 gigahertz band available for unlicensed or license-exempt access. There is an ecosystem available. Chipsets and equipment are already available, and it's growing all the time. We have heard from the numbers from Broadcom that Dave presented during his presentation. Next slide, please. It's a very efficient use of the spectrum, because in that band there are incumbents, and they can continue to thrive in and to coexist with WAS Erlang license exempt devices. So it's like we have the current users, but on the top of that, we can have unlicensed access and Wi-Fi applications. It's also important to have the entire band, because the more unlicensed or license exempt channels we have at allocation, then we can spread the energy across different frequencies and different channels. It's important to enable new applications and new innovative use cases, as we have seen, for example, for the augmented and virtual reality applications. But there is a huge impact on manufacturing, on factories, on industries, as well as connectivity at home. Erlangs also can work very well with any backhaul technologies. So the decision for license exempt access is a decision that creates conditions for Wi-Fi, but also for new radio unlicensed, and the possibilities to complement technologies, like we could have satellite backhaul and then Wi-Fi, or excellent fiber to the home and then Wi-Fi for indoor applications, or even it's very useful for offloading traffic from mobile networks. So the decision for license exempt combines very well with other technologies, and it's going to complement that last mile access. It's also a good reason to allow different stakeholders to deploy gigabit class networks, like, for example, wireless internet service providers. And finally, one of our arguments is like, to regulators and messages like, you should take into account what industry is doing. And in this case, you have a lot of companies, a huge number of delegates, not only from the private sector, but also from other institutions and not-for-profit, like the DSA members, that are promoting and giving the united message, and the ecosystem is there. So the benefits will be immediately there. So we think that is those are some of the arguments that you should consider. And we would be happy to discuss further. You can see some of the resources that will be published. Mary referred to our white paper, so you can find that in the folder with the information. So thank you very much for joining this session, and thank you again for Global for organizing this America's Spectrum Conference. Bye.